In the medieval era, obtaining warmth was a significant challenge. Freezing temperatures, absence of electricity, and lack of modern insulation posed formidable obstacles. And yet, peasant communities didn't merely survive. They adapted with remarkably clever methods that have largely been lost to modern memory. From dwellings heated by smoke to subterranean shelters, from multi-layered wool clothing to containers filled with heated clay, their existence was undeniably colder, yet in some aspects profoundly more ingenious. Within this presentation, we will reveal 10 potent techniques employed by medieval people to maintain warmth. Some were inherently practical, others quite unexpected, but all were deeply rooted in ingenious resourcefulness. The cold was unyielding, but their resilience matched it. Smoke chambers and layered smoke heating. In many medieval homes, the structures we now recognize as chimneys, tall stone flues, were simply non-existent. Smoke did not ascend directly upwards through engineered passages. Instead, it lingered, creating a thicker atmosphere and coating surfaces with soot. However, while this might appear to be a flawed design, this persistent smoke actually played a role in contributing to the homoenepos's warmth. These early dwellings functioned effectively as smoke chambers. Fires were ignited in central hearths, and the resulting smoke was allowed to rise and accumulate just beneath the ceiling. Lacking complete ventilation, the combination of warm air and warm smoke formed a dense thermal layer that gradually occupied the upper portion of the room. While not conducive to easy breathing, this meant heat remained contained within the structure, rather than escaping directly through the roof. In single-room cottages, families learned to inhabit the lower, more breathable zone, while the upper half of the space retained the accumulated heat. Some homes incorporated smoke lofts, platforms, or beams positioned near the roof, where meat and fish were cured utilizing the consistent heat and smoke, thereby keeping food dry and preserved throughout the winter months. But even beneath that upper layer, the trapped warmth added a few critical degrees to the room's temperature, especially during the night after the fire had subsided. Intriguingly, this practice was not merely tolerated, it was a deliberate design choice. Fully ventilated fires dissipated heat too rapidly, leading to homes being constructed to allow just enough smoke leakage without flushing out the warmth entirely. Roof hatches or small vents were opened only when necessary. Some individuals even used fabric or straw to plug gaps around the roof to minimize airflow during cold nights. However, the smoke and sapos function extended beyond merely heating the room. It also served as a natural disinfectant. The continuous exposure helped deter insects, dry out moisture, and safeguard wooden structural elements. There was even an element of security, particularly in isolated areas where concerns about thieves or raiders existed. Smoke emanating from within a sealed home offered no visible clue to outsiders. No flickering firelight visible through chimneys. No illuminating glow to draw unwanted attention. Today, the principle of thermal layering is still employed in structures such as smoke lodges, saunas, survival shelters, and even in contemporary energy-efficient architecture. But medieval peasants did not possess textbooks. They relied on practical experience, experimentation, and the demands of necessity. It was far from glamorous. It left clothes smelling of smoke and coated everything in soot. Nevertheless, it was effective. In the absence of sophisticated chimney construction, they opted for the next most viable solution, keeping the heat within, regardless of its form. Because in the harsh reality of a medieval winter, breathing smoky air was preferable to freezing in clean, silent conditions. While fires provided warmth within the dwelling and smoke filled the upper reaches with heat, medieval people recognized that the most dependable source of warmth originated from the body itself. And the fundamental key to retaining that warmth was wool, utilized abundantly and in multiple layers. Although linen might have been the innermost layer against the skin, wool served as the protective armor against the cold. It was inherently thick, breathable, naturally insulating even when damp, and relatively straightforward to produce. Across most European regions, peasants did not typically wear a single heavy outer coat. Instead, they donned multiple layers of clothing, thereby creating thin pockets of warm air trapped between each garment. This layering system effectively transformed the human body into its own miniature heat engine. The brilliance of this method lay in its adaptability. Individuals could easily add or remove layers depending on their level of physical activity and the ambient temperature. A laborer engaged in fieldwork might shed an outer layer to prevent excessive sweating, then reapply it during periods of rest to avoid rapid cooling. This capacity for thermoregulation through clothing was indispensable during harsh winters in the absence of mobile heating sources. Outer garments were often constructed from coarse wool or felted cloth, both possessing excellent properties for repelling wind and light moisture. Beneath these outer layers, a softer wool tunic or vest helped retain heat closer to the body. In more affluent households, even undergarments and leggings were fashioned from tightly woven wool blends. Accessories such as hoods, gloves, and foot wraps completed the insulating ensemble, ensuring every extremity was protected. However, this technique was not solely about the materials used. The actual method of layering was an integral part of the practical knowledge. Clothing was applied in specific configurations, loose enough to trap air, yet sufficiently snug to hold warmth and arranged to permit controlled airflow when needed. They instinctively understood what contemporary science now corroborates: air functions as an excellent insulator when contained within small, stable layers. Wool also offered a significant survival advantage beyond its insulating properties. In homes with open flames, it exhibited fire resistance, reducing the risk of burns and injuries. It was also naturally antimicrobial, which translated to fewer infections, reduced odor, and decreased necessity for washing, a distinct advantage in winter when drying clothing was exceedingly difficult. Their use of wool extended beyond personal attire. Wool blankets, bedding, and wall hangings also contributed to warming indoor spaces. Tapestries were not merely decorative elements. They served as functional, insulating panels. Today, survivalists and outdoor enthusiasts continue to advocate for the benefits of wool. In bushcraft circles, a single wool blanket can fulfill multiple roles as a coat, sleeping bag, and even a shield against radiant heat from a fire. What medieval people practiced out of necessity is now embraced by choice, precisely because it is effective. They did not possess advanced synthetic fabrics, but with wool, strategic layering, and practical intuition, they wore warmth as if it were a second skin, surviving in the cold from within. Hay straw wall insulation and stuffed gaps. When contemplating medieval dwellings, we often visualize robust stone walls and sturdy timber beams. Yet between these structural elements, particularly in rural peasant cottages, the primary insulation came from something far more rudimentary: straw and sometimes hay. Indeed, the very stalks used to feed livestock and construct thatched roofs were also densely packed into the walls, crevices, and openings of homes to block drafts and retain warmth. Peasants inserted loose straw into every conceivable gap between wooden planks, beneath thatched eaves, and even around the perimeters of doors and windows. This constituted a simple but highly effective form of insulation, transforming drafty shelters into comparatively warm enclosed spaces. It was important to differentiate the medieval terminology. Hay, which is green, dried grass, was primarily used for animal feed, while straw, the dried stalks left over from grain harvest, was the more frequently chosen material for insulation. Straw was less prone to decomposition, lighter in weight, and unlike hay, did not ferment when exposed to dampness, making it particularly suitable for filling walls, floors, and ceilings. Walls constructed using wattle and daub, a technique involving a woven lattice of wooden strips coated with a mixture of clay and straw, relied heavily on straw as both a binding agent and an insulator. Beyond its structural function, additional layers of loose straw were frequently placed within wall cavities or behind simple hanging cloths to create thermal pockets, functioning similarly to modern insulation by trapping air to slow heat loss. Straw was also employed in seasonal or temporary shelters. During harvest periods, laborers camping near fields would construct small huts or lean-tos insulated with straw and reinforced with branches and cloth. In colder months, shepherds sometimes built low, semi-subterranean shelters with walls packed with straw and roofs covered with turf, where body heat alone could sustain a livable interior temperature. Even within permanent homes, straw played roles beyond wall insulation. It was packed beneath floorboards to prevent ground chill, inserted between ceiling beams for overhead insulation, and sewn into large draft stoppers placed at the base of doors or windowsills. Surprisingly, it also provided a degree of sound dampening in crowded homes where entire families occupied a single room, reducing echoes and noise. which subtly enhanced daily life and contributed to a sense of warmth. The muffled quiet within a straw-insulated wall helped foster a more peaceful environment for rest, meals. To retain warmth, everyone slept in close proximity, forming what modern survival experts might term alapos. Heat circle and depause, a configuration where each individual's body traps and shares warmth with the next. The larger the group, the greater the cumulative heat retained beneath the covers or within the confined sleeping area. This technique was particularly crucial for vulnerable individuals such as young children and the elderly, who were more susceptible to the cold. In many homes, children were positioned in the center of the group where the warmth radiating from surrounding bodies helped maintain their core temperature consistently throughout the night. In the harshest climates or most impoverished conditions, even animals joined the sleeping arrangement. Dogs, goats, and occasionally smaller livestock would sleep indoors or positioned at the perimeter of the human circle. Their body heat was a valuable asset, and their presence provided an additional layer of thermal mass, acting as natural living heaters at one impulse feet. To maximize this effect, families frequently utilized thick curtains or canopies to create a trapped layer of heat around the sleeping area. Canopy beds were not exclusive to nobility. Simpler versions were common in peasant homes, where heavy fabrics or even hanging sacks filled with straw created a warm pocket around the bed. Some dwellings also incorporated built-in sleeping nooks, semi-enclosed compartments carved into walls or lofts which effectively restricted airflow and trapped warmth. These small sheltered spaces created an intimate microclimate, a room within a room where even a few degrees of additional heat made a critical difference. The underlying principle was simple. Warmth is amplified through proximity and connection. In an era predating central heating, the human body represented one of the most reliable energy sources available. Sharing that warmth was not simply practical sense. It was woven into their culture and family bonds. And while contemporary society might perceive such closeness as inconvenient, for the medieval peasant, it was merely another night. Cold on the outside, but inside pressed together, the warmth was sufficient. When open fires were not a viable option, either due to safety concerns, limited space, or the need for portability, medieval peasants resorted to utilizing contained heat sources. One of the most ingenious tools in their possession was the use of clay pots filled with embers or heated stones. These clay vessels functioned as rudimentary space heaters. After heating stones in the hearth or gathering glowing coals, peasants would carefully place them into small, thick-walled clay pots. The radiant heat emitted from these pots would gradually and safely warm the surrounding air, especially effective in confined areas such as sleeping spaces, cellars, or even beneath tables. Unlike open flames, these pots could be managed with minimal smoke or fire risk, making them ideal for use within enclosed homes with limited ventilation. They also exhibited excellent long-term thermal retention properties, thanks to the inherent characteristics of baked clay and stone. Once heated, they could radiate gentle warmth for several hours, particularly when insulated by wrapping them in wool or cloth to regulate the heat output. A variation of this method involved placing the heated pot inside a wooden box, occasionally lined with straw or wool, effectively creating a medieval version of a heat pack. In cold rooms, these boxes would be placed beneath benches, positioned at the foot of beds, or even carried beneath cloaks to establish personal heat zones without the need for continuous fuel consumption. This technique also contributed to the development of a type of clay bed warmer, used similarly to metal warming pans. Instead of filling a copper pan with embers and sliding it between the sheets, peasants in less affluent households might employ a small ceramic bowl containing embers, placed safely on a flat tile near the bed. With careful attention to placement, it could gently warm the air and bedding without direct contact. These clay containers also served dual purposes. During daylight hours, they could be used for cooking or transporting warm water. At night, they transitioned into passive heat sources. In winter markets, similar portable warmers were utilized by vendors and craftspeople to keep their hands warm while working outdoors. There is even evidence suggesting that clay pots were carried inside cloaks, held close to the body, or placed near the feet to generate warmth during travel or cold outdoor gatherings. Wrapped in thick cloth or stored within leather pouches, they functioned like medieval hot water bottles, but without the water component. This heating method required neither wealth nor complexity. When the outdoor air was biting cold and firewood was scarce, Some medieval peasants turned to the most ancient form of insulation known to humankind, the earth itself. By constructing shelters that were partially or entirely excavated into the ground, they created homes where nature provided the majority of the heating. These dugouts or semi-buried dwellings leveraged the earthen pose, remarkably stable underground temperature, which remains significantly above freezing even during the deepest parts of winter. By building structures with floors situated below ground level, or in some cases, where only the roof extended above the surface, peasants could significantly reduce heat loss and eliminate exposure to chilling winds. While this technique was not new to the medieval period, it was refined and perfected through generations of experience. In colder regions of Eastern and Northern Europe, entire communities constructed sunken cottages lined with logs, clay, or stone, and topped with roofs made of turf or straw. The thick earthen walls and roofs provided exceptional heat retention, allowing a few hours of fire to provide warmth throughout the entire night. Inside, the layout was simple, typically a single room with a low ceiling, a central hearth, and minimal windows. The smaller the enclosed space, the easier it was to maintain a warm temperature. Smoke generated from the fire contributed to insulating the roof, as discussed previously, and walls were often lined with packed straw or cloth to mitigate moisture and prevent drafts. Some of these shelters were used seasonally, providing refuge for shepherds, field workers, or travelers facing harsh conditions. Others were permanent dwellings, frequently designed to blend seamlessly with the natural landscape. With roofs covered in turf and walls made of earth, they merged into hillsides, a design choice that not only preserved warmth, but also offered a degree of concealment during periods of warfare or civil unrest. Dugouts were not merely practical, they were strategically intelligent. In essence, the core logic behind modern energy-efficient underground homes derives directly from these ingenious medieval solutions. To a contemporary observer, these shelters might appear indicative of poverty. However, for those who constructed them, they represented a vital shield, a sanctuary of warmth carved directly from the frozen earth. When the world outside succumbed to frost, the most astute peasants did not attempt to conquer nature. They embedded themselves within it, allowing the earth to provide protection. In the Middle Ages, a cloak was far more than a simple garment draped over the shoulders. It functioned as a thermal survival tool, meticulously developed over centuries of necessity, designed to transform the human body into its own heat source and effectively trap that heat for as long as possible. Primarily crafted from thick wool, often layered or felted for increased density, winter cloaks were typically cut in a semicircular shape intended to wrap around the entire body, creating a protective barrier against the wind. They were not fitted snugly like modern coats. They were expansive, weighty, and extended well past the knees or even down to the ankles. This loose form was not merely for aesthetic purposes. It created a dome-like space of warm air around the body, much like a miniature tent. When drawn tight and fastened at the neck or shoulder, a cloak effectively functioned as a personal heat chamber. The body opposed chata's inherent warmth, insulated by the heavy fabric, could be retained close to the skin for hours. Combined with layered tunics worn underneath, a single cloak could provide sufficient warmth even in conditions of sleet, snow, or biting wind. However, the utility of cloaks extended beyond simple insulation. They also served as multi-purpose survival gear. Peasants utilized them as blankets during journeys or within unheated homes, as sleeping covers at night, particularly in shared beds or floor spaces, as windbreaks while working outdoors, and even as improvised tents in the field, draped over branches or poles for temporary shelter. In some regions, cloaks were lined with fur or additional wool padding to enhance their effectiveness. Others were treated with lanolin, the natural oil found in sheep apose, wool, or wax to improve water resistance. And since most were produced locally using wool spun within the village, peasants could customize them to suit specific regional climates and needs. Head coverage was often integrated into the design as well. Many cloaks featured attached hoods or cowls which could be pulled low over the face and secured at the side, providing crucial protection for the neck, ears, and head, areas where significant heat loss occurs. Positioned alongside or even connected to the central fireplace, these stone benches absorbed radiant heat generated by the fire throughout the day. Wooden furniture also adapted to this principle. Some homes featured hollowed wooden benches or boxes designed to hold heated stones or small pots of embers within, managed with careful attention to prevent fire hazards. These warm seats were typically placed near windows or outer walls, areas most susceptible to cold drafts. Even portable folding stools and hand-warming tables, small wooden structures with compartments intended for hot coals, were used in slightly more affluent households. While commoners may not have owned these specific items, they often improvised similar methods using clay pots or stones placed beneath benches. The genius lies in the layered application. Furniture wasn't just functional, it was thermal. Seating, bedding, and even work surfaces became low-technology radiators, drawing warmth from the same fire and retaining it long after the last ember had faded. Today, thermal mass remains a fundamental principle in passive heating architecture. Homes incorporating stone floors, clay walls, or tile-covered stoves are, in essence, modern adaptations to principles understood by medieval peasants through trial and necessity. In an era where every resource was precious, even the design of a place to sit was conceived with survival in mind. Because when your bench can function as a battery for heat, you don't have to merely rest. You are effectively recharging. Outdoor windbreaks and sun traps. Not all medieval heating strategies were confined to indoor spaces. In fact, peasants recognized that controlling the environment immediately surrounding the home was equally as significant as managing interior conditions. Lacking insulation foam or contemporary engineering solutions, they relied on two potent, readily available tools: windbreaks and sun traps. A windbreak constituted any structure, whether naturally occurring or constructed by human hands, designed to obstruct or divert cold winds. In expansive open fields, peasants strategically planted thick hedgerows, dense shrubbery, or rows of trees on the side of their homes facing prevailing winds to absorb and deflect icy gusts. Over time, these barriers dramatically reduced wind chill, creating an immediate area around the dwelling that felt considerably warmer. Where natural growth was not available, they utilized fences, panels woven from wattle, or even carefully stacked piles of firewood to serve as protective walls. These were not erected merely for privacy or containing livestock. They functioned as thermal defense systems, positioned strategically to break the force of the wind before it struck the home post walls or doors. The outcome: reduced heat loss, fewer drafts entering the interior, and increased comfort inside using the same amount of fuel. However, peasants didn't solely focus on protection from the wind. They also understood how to effectively harness the sun-imposed energy. Many medieval homes, particularly in colder regions, were constructed or oriented to face south, allowing sunlight to penetrate through windows or doors during daylight hours. On cold but clear days, doors and shutters were briefly opened to permit sunlight to warm the interior stone or clay surfaces, which would then radiate heat slowly throughout the night. Some villages even established outdoor work areas in sun-exposed corners, shielded from wind and enclosed by stone or thatch. These solar pockets became warm spots for activities such as cooking, repairing tools, or preparing food without the necessity of burning additional firewood indoors. In essence, this represented passive solar heating centuries before the term was coined. By observing the landscape, noting the sun-imposed key trajectory, and positioning key structures judiciously, peasants could extend the benefit of every sunbeam, especially during the shorter days of winter. These techniques were neither elaborate nor technologically complex. They were quiet, consistently effective, and deeply intertwined with their environment. Modern green architecture continues to incorporate these same fundamental ideas: windbreak landscaping, maximizing passive solar exposure, and utilizing thermal mass. However, medieval peasants didn't operate with blueprints. They relied on instinct. When the cold descended, they didn't just retreat indoors. They actively shaped the world around them to capture and retain the light. Ash beds and residual heat from hearths. In the unforgiving landscape of a medieval winter, every ember possessed value. And once the fire had burned down, what remained was not simply waste. It presented an opportunity. Peasants understood that the ashes left in the hearth still held residual warmth long after the flames had been extinguished. They learned to leverage this residual heat to their advantage in the most direct, physical manner possible: ash beds. Before retiring for the night, some families would spread hot ashes beneath mattresses filled with straw or directly onto the packed earth where they intended to sleep. A layer of cloth or animal hide was placed over the ashes to prevent direct contact with the heat and the warmth retained within the ashes provided a gentle heat from below, akin to a rudimentary version of a heated mattress pad. While this method did not sustain warmth throughout the entire night, it offered significant relief during the initial hours of bitter cold. It helped keep dampness out of the bedding, warm the body from below, a crucial area where heat is often lost, and made falling asleep in a freezing room slightly more tolerable. Ash possessed properties beyond just retaining heat. It was also dry and offered a degree of insulation. In some households, ashes were utilized to create temporary insulation along the base of walls or even beneath the hearth itself. The porous nature of ash made it a lightweight buffer that slowed heat loss and absorbed residual warmth from coals or stones. Another technique involved banking the fire, which entailed covering live coals with a thick layer of ash at night. This action smothered the flames but preserved the core heat until morning. In the early hours, someone would stir the hearth, uncover the embers, and reignite the fire without the need to start completely from scratch. This was effectively the medieval version of a sleep mode for fire. Less smoke generated, less wood consumed, and reduced effort required. Ashes also served as a base layer in foot warmers and clay pots, aiding in heat retention and preventing burns when embers were stored in containers. They acted as a protective cushion between the hot material and the surrounding structure, thereby extending the safe and effective usage of these tools. Beyond its role in providing warmth, ash served dozens of other practical purposes, including as a cleaning agent, fertilizer, and even for treating wounds. However, its function in heating, acting as both an insulator and a thermal battery, stands as a quiet testament to medieval resourcefulness. Nothing was wasted, not even the gray residue of yesterday Opostasianus fire. Because when one possesses almost nothing, they learn that warmth can reside even in the ashes, provided they know how to preserve it. The wisdom embedded in the cold. Modern heating is often loud, expensive, and invisible. In contrast, medieval heating was intimate. It was earned through effort. There were no buttons to manipulate, no thermostats to adjust. Only bodies, stones, smoke, and instinct woven together in countless small acts of survival. What might appear as hardship from an external perspective was, in reality, a profound engagement with the natural world, understanding how to utilize what the earth provided and nothing more. They reinforced walls with straw. They transformed the remnants of fires into fuel. They carried their shelter upon their backs, and somehow, despite the absence of insulation, electricity, or modern conveniences, they endured. Today, we rely on complex systems that we scarcely comprehend. They, however, depended on their own hands, their homes, and each other. And in confronting the same brutal cold, they discovered warmth not solely in physical heat, but in their capacity for creativity, connection, and mutual care. Perhaps the pertinent question is not how they survived the winter, but rather, could we?